Hey, before we dive deep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you find this story intriguing. Now, imagine yourself waking up in a cramped attic room somewhere in a bustling medieval town in the 14th century. The wooden beams creak faintly as morning light filters through a grimy window, dust particles dancing lazily in the air. Outside, the sounds of merchants hawking their wares mix with the clatter of horses' hooves and the murmur of early risers beginning their day. The stone walls around you still carry the damp chill from last night's rain, while a faint, earthy scent of wet plaster and fresh pigments lingers in the cramped space. Your fingers ache from hours spent yesterday brushing delicate strokes on a chapel wall. Yet the stubborn brushes refuse to obey your will this morning. Sleep has been a rare luxury, interrupted often by the weight of unfinished commissions and restless thoughts. Today promises another long day of painstaking work, mixing pigments from crushed minerals, climbing precarious scaffolds, and praying your labor won't be ruined by damp or dust. You wonder quietly if anyone outside these walls truly understands the hardships behind the seemingly divine art that adorns grand halls and sacred spaces. But here's the question that lingers as you set your worn tools aside for a brief moment. Can you bear the harsh reality of being a medieval artist? One trapped between devotion, craft, and survival in a world where creativity is a luxury and every brushstroke demands sacrifice. Let's begin this journey into the life of an artist forgotten by time, but immortalized in the colors of history. You wake to the weight of yesterday's brushstroke still clinging to your shoulders. The stiff linen shirt scratches your skin, the chill from the stone floor crawling up your legs as you rise. You stretch your back, sore from hunching over sketches and panels for hours on end. The room smells of boiled glue and ground pigments, a reminder that art here is not some lofty pursuit, it's labor. And in this time, you are not a painter. You are a servant. In the 14th century, artists like you aren't free. You don't wander through sunlit fields with an easel inspired by the divine whisper of the landscape. You're not splashing oil on canvas for your own joy. You're more bricklayer than visionary. Your hands create, but not from freedom. They obey. You are hired, commissioned, tethered to the patron's will. When a bishop wants a last supper for the refectory wall, you don't suggest themes. You nod. You thank him for the honor. And you pray quietly that he doesn't change his mind halfway through or decide the saint's eyes look too Eastern and order you to redo the entire thing, because you don't get paid until it's done. And even then, sometimes not at all. You might spend months preparing a panel, cutting the wood, stretching the canvas, gessoing, sketching, gilding, only for the client to say, it's not holy enough, as if your paintbrush can summon angels at will. You don't own your style. If you studied under a master, you copy his strokes. If you're part of a guild, you follow the rules. Want to try a new perspective technique? Too risky. Want to paint a Madonna with brown eyes because your mother had them? Too personal. Want to add depth or emotion? Be careful. Emotion might be mistaken for heresy. Your palette isn't chosen for harmony or vision. It's limited by what you can afford or forage. Crushed lapis lazuli if you're lucky, or just ochre and charcoal. Ultramarine? Only if your patron can afford it, and they'll remind you. Often, you're not starving perhaps, but you're never far from it either. You live by commissions, feast or famine, and mostly famine, unless you're one of the few working in the courts of Florence or Avignon. Your name will not be remembered. You are brush and hand, not mind and name. You're dependent on others' whims, on their tastes, on their finances. One noble's bad harvest, and your fresco is postponed. One war in the region, and your altar triptych is forgotten beneath layers of dust and ash. You don't argue. You don't push back. You nod, scrape the failed paint, and begin again. And yet, you keep going. Because art, even in chains, is still art. The compulsion to create doesn't wait for freedom. But the irony is bitter, isn't it? You were born with a gift, and that gift has become a leash. So tell me, what does it feel like to be a prisoner of your own talent, shackled not by iron, but by expectation and the ever-watchful eye of your patron? Of course, you're a prisoner of your own talent, but worse than that, you're chained to your workspace, a room that mocks the idea of inspiration. Picture it now, the studio where you spend most of your waking hours. No lofty skylights here, no polished floors, just rough stone beneath your feet, uneven and cold, and wooden beams above, slick with soot and the scent of oil smoke. The air is thick with dust from crushed minerals and floating bits of linen fiber, and you can taste chalk every time you inhale too deeply. The light? It's barely enough to sketch by. A single, trembling flame flickers in a dish of tallow, its greasy smoke curling into the rafters. On clouded days, you open the shutters and pray for enough sun to mix colors properly. But more often than not, you squint into the dim and hope your instincts haven't failed you. Look around your work table. It's stained with decades of effort, spatters of ochre and streaks of malachite, hardened puddles of egg yolk mixed with soot. That's your tempera, ground pigment blended with fresh egg, mixed on a flat stone, beaten with a pestle you carved yourself. Each hue has to be prepared separately every morning, just before it's needed. Blue doesn't wait for brown to dry, and it spoils fast. The yolk turns, the mix thickens or separates. There are no shortcuts. You reach for a brush, and your fingers don't quite close right anymore. The joints ache. The skin along your thumb is cracked where the bristles cut in last week. You've bled into more paintings than you care to admit. Your back, well, you don't really feel it anymore. It's just a constant pressure behind your lungs, a reminder that no chair was built with comfort in mind, only stability, and you dare not lean too close. One wrong move, and you'll smudge hours of work. The air in here is heavy with scent. Linseed oil, beeswax, vinegar boiled with resin. Each one clings to your clothes, your hair, your breath. You smell like your trade. You carry it with you, even when you leave. Beneath your table, there's a bucket of broken tools, split quills, frayed brushes, shards of glass from pigments you couldn't afford to waste but broke anyway. Nothing is discarded unless it's truly useless. That palette knife with the chipped edge, still good for scraping gold leaf. That rag torn into ribbons, perfect for buffing gesso. Now look up. That's your latest commission, stretching across the far wall. A Madonna and Child, destined for a merchant's chapel. You've layered it for weeks, from charcoal underdrawing to the final coat of varnish. And today, you notice something. At the bottom edge, just near the infant's foot, there's a bubble forming beneath the plaster. You touch it gently. It gives under your finger. The lime has separated from the wall. The damp has gotten in. Your stomach knots, because you know what comes next. The paint will flake. The layer will peel. It may take a week. It may take a day. But it will happen. And when it does, the client won't blame the wall, or the weather, or the poor materials he provided. He'll blame you. So now tell me, how would you survive that moment? When all your effort, your pain, your hours in the dim are about to fall off in dusty curls because the wall decided it was tired of holding your masterpiece. Of course you notice the blister beneath the plaster. You always notice. You were trained to. And maybe, if the patron hadn't insisted on mixing cheaper sand with the lime, if the wall hadn't been damp when you started, if the chapel roof hadn't leaked, then perhaps your Madonna wouldn't be at risk of flaking into ghost dust. But here you are, staring at a bulge in the surface like it's a silent accusation. You know what happens next. It begins with hairline cracks, so fine they almost look intentional. You might even convince yourself it's just a wrinkle in the paint, but within days, they spread. The skin of your fresco lifts like curling parchment. Then comes the crumbling, the peeling, the silent disintegration of what once consumed you, hours, days, and hope reduced to mineral dust. And the smell. Once it begins to rot beneath, you can't hide it. A faint mildew creeps out from behind the plaster. Not everyone notices, but you do. You always do. You remember what the masters told you. Paint on wet plaster, but only if the wall is dry. A contradiction worthy of any Guildhall debate, but they weren't wrong. A wall too wet rejects the lime, too dry, and it drinks your pigment greedily, leaving a ghost of your original color behind. No redo, no second chance. Sometimes you try to patch it. You slice away the blistered section, scrape the wall, reapply plaster, repaint. But it's never seamless. The colors don't match. The texture betrays you. And the worst insult, no one else seems to care. They walk past your repaired Christ with dull eyes and say, "Why is he paler on that side?" You smile, you nod, you die a little. There are tricks, of course. You mix in powdered marble for brightness, vinegar to kill mold, even wine lees to bind stubborn pigments. But nothing stops moisture. It seeps through stone. It travels unseen. It listens to no artist. And then there's the salt, that cursed white bloom that creeps up from the base of the wall like some ghostly betrayal. Efflorescence, they call it now. You just call it ruin. Your fresco may last a season, a year, a decade if God is kind, but rarely a lifetime. Still, you climb the scaffold, you grind the pigments, you dip the brush, again and again. You make peace with the impermanence, because in truth, most of your work will vanish, not from fire or war, but from rain, humidity, rotten plaster. You paint saints with the knowledge they'll be devoured by mold. You gild halos that will tarnish with time. You sign your name, if you're lucky enough to be allowed, knowing it might dissolve before anyone ever reads it. It's like building cathedrals out of morning mist. But that's the irony, isn't it? You were taught that beauty is eternal, that art is forever. Yet here you stand, watching your masterpiece bubble away before the varnish has even dried. So let me ask you, what do you do when your life's work begins to disappear faster than you can say linseed oil? You try not to think about the fresco. What's done is done, or at least it was, before the wall rebelled. Now you step outside the workshop, blinking against the dull midday glare, and let your feet carry you through the winding alleys of your town. The streets are uneven and lined with damp straw and the occasional forgotten turnip. Your shoes, worn thin at the heel, drink in every puddle with ungrateful enthusiasm. By the time you reach your corner, your toes are already cold. You live above a cooper's shop, not in the nice part, if there is a nice part, but in a lean-to attic built onto the back of his roof. The stairs creak and moan as you climb, and each groan reminds you, you don't just live like this. You're lucky to live like this. Rent is paid in coin and favors, sometimes both, and both are hard to keep. Your room is barely long enough to stretch out in, but there's a window, and that counts for something. Through it, you can smell the brewery 3 doors down. The yeast, the smoke, the barley. It clings to the fabric of the town like gossip. You take it in with shallow breaths and listen to the city living without you for a moment. Now you're hungry. And hunger isn't poetic. It doesn't inspire. It's a slow, grinding thing that presses against your ribs while you try to sketch. So you reach for what little you have. A hunk of rye bread, coarse and dry enough to carve initials into. A soup, or what passes for one, made from cabbage leaves boiled 3 times too many. And maybe, if the market was kind, a strip of dried fish, saltier than a merchant's tongue. You chew slowly, not for savouring, just to make it last. And what about clothes? You wear the same woolen tunic 5 days running. It smells faintly of oil, sweat and smoke, your holy trinity. The collar itches, the sleeves scratch, and underneath it all, your underclothes are patched with bits of sackcloth. There's a hole in your left sleeve and a stain on your right cuff that never quite came out. You tell yourself it's pigment. You hope it's pigment. But it's not just about warmth or hunger. It's the fatigue. The slow, syrupy kind of tired that settles in your spine and never quite leaves. You dream of beds with soft linen and real pillows, but you wake up on straw. You fall asleep to the sounds of rats, whispers in the walls, footsteps below. And yet, despite all this, you keep painting. Even when you have to choose between buying pigment and buying meat. Even when the nights stretch longer than your candle stub. Even when your back screams, your fingers ache, and your stomach threatens mutiny. Because it's the only thing that feels like it belongs to you. Still, there are days when the temptation creeps in. You pass the monastery gates on your way to the cathedral, and you hear them chanting. Clean robes, regular meals, peaceful silence broken only by bells and prayer. No patrons, no debts, no collapsing frescoes, just parchment and ink and quiet. So, could you walk through that gate and leave it all behind? Could you trade brush for book, fresco for scripture? Could you surrender your name, your art, your struggle for a robe and a vow? Tell me, could you resist the call of that quiet life? Or is it already whispering to you now? Of course the thought tempts you. Trading all this for monastic silence, for ink instead of colour, parchment instead of plaster. But deep down, you know better. Because even within the cloistered walls, and far beyond them, your art would never truly be your own. Not here, not now. You live in a time where the church is not just the heart of faith, it is the spine of power. It decides what beauty looks like, what truth feels like, what hands may shape it. And you, as an artist, are simply a tool in its grasp. You've seen it firsthand. That painting of the Annunciation, the one that took you weeks of study and labour, you remember how Brother Matthias frowned at the angel's expression. Too human, he said. He looks like a merchant. So you softened the jawline, erased the smirk, added another fold to the robe. You made the divine less familiar, more distant. You've learned what to avoid. A Virgin Mary with unbound hair, too sensual. A bleeding Christ with too much blood, indecent. A saint with sorrowful eyes, risky. Joyful eyes, also risky. You're walking a tightrope stretched between doctrine and doubt. One misplaced gesture, and the whole image topples. There are guidelines, lists, manuscripts passed between clerics and commissioners, detailing which symbols are acceptable, which colours imply what virtues, and how many toes a cherub may have before it becomes a theological problem. You're expected to memorize them, to paint with obedience in each stroke. And there are eyes, not just the priests reviewing your sketches, but the monks who whisper, the patrons who worry, the abbots who inquire, and the bishops who decide. Your brush is watched, always watched. Sometimes you push the boundary, just a little. A tear you didn't explain. a cloud shaped like a question mark, a gaze that lingers too long. But you know what happens to those who go too far. You've heard of work scraped off walls, paintings burned, artists shunned. For deviation, they say, for pride, for heresy. Yet how can one create without pride? You long to paint the world as you see it, the color of a storm before it breaks, the curve of a mother's hand that isn't symbolic, but simply loving. A man's eyes filled not with sainthood, but with uncertainty. But you can't. Not here, not now. So you paint halos because you must. You use gold leaf where you'd rather use shadow. You flatten heaven into pattern. And you silence your vision with scripture. And in your quiet moments, when no one's watching, you wonder, how does an artist preserve a self when every stroke must pass through someone else's judgment? When even your imagination wears a robe and ring? Tell me, how do you keep your soul intact when even your shadow must kneel? You already know how to bend your creativity to the church's narrow corridor of approval. But even once you master the holy limitations, there remains another force, flesh and blood, coins in hand, breath in your face. The patron. He's the one who makes the final call. Sometimes it's a bishop. Sometimes it's a wealthy merchant with a conscience to cleanse and a family tomb to decorate. And then, of course, there's the knight, back from a crusade with a guilty conscience and a blank chapel wall. Or a monk, tight-lipped and sharp-eyed, who commissions art with the same generosity he uses to distribute penance, sparingly. You remember one such monk now, Brother Audric, abbot of Saint-Michel-de-Bois, tall, bone-thin, eyes like slits in granite. His robes rustled with authority, and his every sentence began with, "In the interest of the Lord," which always meant less money, more work, and impossible deadlines. You painted Saint Sebastian for his side chapel 3 times. First, the martyr's expression was too defiant, then too sorrowful. Finally, not pious enough. Each repaint was unpaid. He watched each stroke like a crow inspecting bread. Or Sir Géraud, that nobleman with a polished beard and a taste for grandeur. He commissioned a depiction of Judgment Day for his family crypt. "Make it terrifying," he said, tapping his boot. So you gave angels flaming swords and the damned faces contorted in anguish. Then he returned weeks later, aghast. "My daughter saw it and wept. Make it gentler." You painted over the flames, added clouds, reduced the expressions to polite discomfort. And still, the coin purse he dropped on the table felt lighter than promised. They always want changes. They want the impossible. Add gold here. Make it larger. Soften the shadows. Paint it like that fresco in Siena, they say, not realizing the Sienese artist had assistants and a patron who paid what he owed. You nod, of course, always nod, because your livelihood rests on their mood. If they're pleased, you might get another commission. If not, you'll be lucky to get your remaining payment at all. And complaining, that's reserved for those who can afford to miss a meal. You are not a painter in their eyes. You are a craftsman with a brush, like a mason with a chisel, or a tailor with thread. Art is a service, and you are its servant. You try to smile when they arrive with corrections. You keep your voice low, deferential. Even when they tell you, mid-project, to change the saints' robes from blue to red because their family colors demand it. Even when they point at a perfect hand and say, "Something about the fingers bothers me." There are no thank yous, just grunts of approval or silence. There is no partnership, only transaction. And still, you labor on. Because that's the game, isn't it? Pleasing the powerful. Translating their visions with trembling hands and limited pigment. pretending you didn't flinch when they insulted your composition. But what if he storms in tomorrow, cloak damp from rain, breath heavy with wine, and says, "I've changed my mind again, start over"? So let me ask you, can you truly satisfy a patron? When his whims shift with every gust of wind, when his mood rewrites your art every 5 minutes, you'd think, after all the demands and whims of patrons, that your real work begins with the brush. But no, your art starts long before that, before the sketch, before the scaffold, even before the light breaks through the shutters. It starts in the preparation. And that, more than anything, is where your body begins to give up before your spirit does. You're hunched over a block of animal hide this morning, calfskin, trimmed and scraped thin. The glue must be boiled gently, not too hot, or it loses its binding strength, not too cold, or it turns lumpy. The smell, sweet at first, then sour, clings to your fingers even after scrubbing. Your hands are raw, your fingernails stained with pigment dust and wax. The mortar bowl is cold to the touch. You grind your colors fresh every day. No shortcuts. A pinch of lapis lazuli, if you're lucky, or crushed azurite. Ochre for golds, verdigris for green, soot for black. You use your pestle like a prayer, crushing minerals into powder as fine as flour. It squeaks as it moves, rough against rough, and sends vibrations up your arm until your elbow throbs. Then comes the mixing. Egg yolk for tempera, vinegar or wine for binding. Sometimes you add honey or garlic water or even fig sap, not for flavor, but for texture, for longevity, for magic, the sort of invisible magic that holds color to a wall longer than winter holds snow. But none of it is easy. The yolk must be separated with care, no trace of white. The vinegar must be boiled off slightly. The resin must be crushed just so. Your hands shake from cold or from fatigue, and the tip of your nose is numb, even though the fire in the corner has been fed since dawn. The brushes are no better. You make those too, squirrel hair, goose feather shafts. They fray fast, the bristles split, and you've learned, with no small bitterness, that even the best brush betrays you eventually. You dip it into your pigment, and it weeps at the wrong moment, leaving a streak where there should have been a whisper. You cough. The dust from your grinding hangs in the air. You don't notice it anymore, not until your chest tightens mid-stroke, or your nose begins to bleed faintly from inside. And still, you kneel. You lean close. You scrape the wall smooth with a flat blade and smear it with a thin layer of gesso. The gesso is cold, grainy. It dries too fast if you leave it, too slow if you wait. Time is not your friend here, it's your judge. There's a rhythm to it, yes, a quiet meditative rhythm, but it's not peace. It's endurance. It's control. It's the demand of precision when your shoulders ache and your joints crackle with each movement. You try not to glance at the light outside. The way it crawls across the stones tells you it's midday, though your stomach insists it must be evening already. You haven't eaten. You forgot. Or maybe you just didn't notice. Your fingers tremble as you lift the brush again. Not from emotion, not from inspiration, but from sheer physical wear. And this is just the beginning. You haven't even painted a face yet. Only a background, a sky, and skies are never simple. So let me ask you, how can you be expected to create beauty when your body whispers for rest and your hands rebel with every stroke? Of course your body aches. It always does. And yet, despite the cold fingers, the powdered dust in your lungs, and the brush that won't quite hold its shape, you still return to the wall. Because now comes the part that matters. The face. You prepared for this. Weeks of layering, sketching, blocking, underpainting, And now the central figure, St. Julian, or maybe St. Catherine, depending on which draft your patron finally approved. It doesn't matter. They all have the same glow, the same tilted gaze, the same expression of detached serenity. You dip your brush in diluted ochre, barely touching the bristles to the wall. The stroke must be deliberate but soft, a whisper in colour. You start with the cheeks, then the shadows of the nose, a curve beneath the eye. Each line is a decision, too sharp, and the saint looks judgmental, too soft, and they melt into anonymity. You're not painting a person, you're painting the idea of grace. It takes time. Hours melt into silence. You forget your back, you forget your hunger, you forget your fingers that keep cramping. You forget everything but the gaze forming under your hand. And then you hear it, the footsteps. How long until it's finished? He asks. Again. The patron, arms folded, frown half buried beneath a velvet hood. You give him a polite nod. You don't say what you're thinking. You don't say, if I rush it, it will die on the wall. You don't say, this face is not a wheel you can turn faster. You just say, a few more days perhaps. He doesn't understand. He never does. He wants it done. But this isn't bread or iron or cloth. This is time made visible. And you're not a weaver. You're a translator of light and soul into lime and pigment. At least, you used to be. Now, sometimes you feel like a machine, a moving hand, a tool with flesh. Faces blur together. St. Catherine begins to resemble the Virgin. The Virgin starts to look suspiciously like St. Stephen. And still, they tell you, make it more holy. As if that's something you can measure in brushstrokes. Sometimes you wonder, would it be easier to paint symbols instead? Just gold circles, blocks of colour, sacred geometry. At least then no one would say, his nose is too Roman, or she doesn't look pure enough. You imagine a world where art is left unfinished, where faces aren't required to look celestial, where time is allowed to sit on the brush like a breath. But then you remember, this is not your world, this is your commission, and you finish the eye. You know this piece may be remembered, or it may be repainted in 10 years, covered with plaster, or fade into dust like the others. So you ask yourself, what if this, your most delicate, careful work, never gets seen for what it truly is? What if no one notices the thousands of moments folded into that one sacred face? You think about your best work, the one that nearly broke your hand, an altarpiece of St. Michael, layered in vermilion, outlined in gold, each feather a miracle of patience. You think about it not because it's still there, but because it isn't. It vanished one summer in a single night of smoke and shouting. You smelled the fire before you saw it. The wind had shifted, carrying ash through the alleys, coating your windowsill in soot. Then the bells rang. Not the slow toll of vespers, but fast, urgent, hacked by hand. You threw open the shutter and saw it, flames twisting up from the merchant quarter, screams, running feet, sparks tumbling through the sky like cursed stars. You don't remember much of that night, only the rush, the panic, the buckets passed hand to hand. And the chapel, your chapel, lit from within, not by candles, but by the blaze devouring your St. Michael, as if he'd never lifted his sword. Gone. That's the truth of this world. You paint for permanence in a world that answers with chaos. Not just fire, but famine. A failed harvest means your patron no longer has coin. He cancels your next commission and pays you in grain instead. Grain riddled with weevils. You accept it anyway. What else can you do? And then there's plague. You've seen it sweep through your city like a grim wind. First the baker, then the priest, then your apprentice, who coughed through one morning sketch and didn't wake the next. You burned his brushes, buried his tools. You painted again a week later, because hunger does not wait for morning. Wars come too. Soldiers press through the town, requisitioning homes, taking what they need. You hide your pigments under floorboards. You keep your brushes near your bed. You stay quiet. You learn to listen for the wrong accent, the clang of boots. A single argument can turn into a riot. One misplaced painting, an icon on the wrong wall, can be labeled blasphemy or rebellion, depending on which lord wins this week. And sickness, you carry that too, not always visible, but it crouches in your chest, in your joints. Your fingers swell in the cold. Your eyesight blurs on overcast days. You know artists who've gone blind, or whose hands have curled so tight with pain they can no longer hold a quill. Still, you paint, because when you're painting, the noise fades. You forget your debt, your hunger, the ache in your spine. There is only line, color, form, the act of creating a world even as the real one threatens to come apart. It's not always noble. Sometimes it's desperation. Sometimes it's escape. But it's always something. You once painted a virgin while the streets outside filled with funeral carts. And for a moment, just a moment, you felt calm. As if her downcast eyes held all the sorrow you didn't know how to name. So you ask yourself, in a world of broken roofs and broken laws and broken bodies, can you still paint when everything around you is falling apart? Of course you keep painting. Even when the sky burns, even when the cough won't leave your chest, even when your art is swallowed by rot and ruin. Because at the end of the day, you still need to eat. And in this world, paint doesn't buy bread. Not directly. You know the rhythm of it now. A commission arrives, sometimes formally, sealed with wax and carried by a boy who runs faster than he listens. Other times, it's just a knock on the door and a whispered agreement in the cold, cramped nave of a crumbling church. The price is discussed. You nod, as always, because you're not a merchant. You're not allowed to haggle. You take what is offered and pray the offer stands once the work is done. And even then, you rarely get it all at once. A third up front, if you're lucky. Another portion when the sketch is approved. The rest, maybe at completion. Maybe in flour or cloth. Maybe not at all. You know how it feels to open a pouch and hear the hollow rattle of a short payment. Or worse, no pouch at all. Just a nod and a promise. Soon, they say. The church treasury is low this month. The Lord is travelling. The harvest was poor. You've learned how to stretch a coin. You count every one. One for pigment. Lapis is out of the question, of course, but perhaps a little red lake. One for wax, another for linseed oil. A few to pay the boy who helps carry panels. A few for rent. A few more, if any are left, for bread and onions. There are weeks where your only meal comes from a friendly baker's wife who traded 2 rolls for a quick charcoal sketch of her late husband. There are nights you sleep beside your easel, wrapped in your cloak. Too cold to think and too hungry to dream. And always, always the competition looms. Other artists lurk at the edge of your circle. Some are younger, some are faster. Some, truth be told, better. You hear whispers that Master Collard underbid you for the shrine commission, that he paints saints with the faces of noble women, and that certain patrons like that sort of thing. You think about copying him, just a little, cutting corners, using cheaper glue, simplifying the backgrounds, but you know where that road leads. A cracked fresco, a ruined name. You only have your skill, and even that is rented, not owned. Worse still is betrayal. A friend who borrowed your brushes and sold them. A patron who promised work. then hired a foreigner for half the price. You can't complain. No one listens. You're just another craftsman in the square, another nameless soul whose art decorates spaces grander than his own life will ever be. But there's one thing you can't ignore, the gnawing truth that hides behind every panel and palette. What do you do when the work is done? The wall is painted, and they look you in the eye and say, "There's no money left." And still, you have to feed your family. So tell me, what do you do when you've sold your soul in strokes, but the coin never comes? Of course, you've been shorted your pay. You've watched your finest work crack in damp silence. You've bowed to patrons and priests alike. But somehow, none of that stings quite as sharply as the quietest betrayal, the one that whispers from inside your own chest. It starts on days like this, when the wall is ready, the pigments are ground, and you still hesitate with the brush in your hand. Not because you're unsure what to paint, but because you can't remember why. Why this image? Why now? Why you? You try to push through it, of course. There's no room for softness here. You paint, not because you're inspired, but because the firewood won't buy itself. You paint because the baker won't feed you for a story about how you almost painted a masterpiece. Still, something's off. You step back from your panel and squint. The saint's face stares back blankly. It's correct, proportional, balanced, but it feels lifeless, too polished, too safe. You feel like a musician forced to play the same hymn every day, note for note, until it turns into noise. And then come the questions, whispered in the privacy of your own mind. Is this good enough? Is this still mine? Am I even an artist anymore? Or just a hand that remembers how to move? You've heard of others who felt this way. One of your old masters used to disappear for days, claiming he was seeking God in shadow and shape. He came back hollow-eyed and silent. Another swore off painting altogether and became a scribe, said letters were simpler, less burdened by soul. There's a strange kind of loneliness to this trade. You spend hours in silence, days without real conversation. People speak to you, yes, but rarely with you. They speak of saints and symbols, not thoughts or fears. They praise your craft, then walk away without ever seeing the person behind the brush. And when your work is complete, there is no applause, no letters, no echo of your name in the cathedral walls. Only a new commission, another face, another saint. You wonder, sometimes, if your best work has already passed you by. If that flash of brilliance you once felt, when light hit the page just right, and your hand moved without hesitation, was a fluke, a gift given and then taken back. Still, something keeps you here. Maybe it's the memory of that one fresco in the chapel of Saint Pierre, the way the morning sun lit the gold in the angel's wing, how the old woman stood silently in front of it, lips moving in prayer, her eyes glistening with something you couldn't name. She didn't know your name. She never would. But in that moment, you felt it. Something passed between you. A silent recognition. A shared breath between creator and beholder. It's not glory that keeps you, not payment, not pride. It's those rare moments when the world quiets and someone feels what you felt, without a word being spoken. But how do you keep chasing that when no one thanks you? When your best work fades behind candles and incense, forgotten before it's even dry? Tell me, how do you stay inspired when no one is watching? You stay, you keep painting. Not because it's easy, not because it always feels right, but because something in you refuses to go silent. And perhaps, even more than survival, what keeps your brush moving is this: the craft itself, the sheer stubborn brilliance of invention. Because yes, the world is collapsing around you, Patrons are late, and your wrists burn with exhaustion. But in the quiet of your workshop, you have begun to unlock something. A method, a secret, a technique no one taught you. You remember the first time you tried true fresco, buon fresco, painting into wet plaster, racing against time before it dries. It terrified you. There's no room for hesitation. Each stroke is final. No layering, no corrections. Just you, the pigment, and the rhythm of lime drying beneath your fingertips. It was maddening, and it was thrilling. You've mixed your own gesso from chalk and glue, refining the ratio until it spreads like cream and dries like bone. You've boiled linseed oil until it thickens just enough to hold a glaze, and when it dries, it sings beneath candlelight. You've experimented with shell gold, powdered gold leaf, suspended in gum arabic, applied with the tiniest of brushes to illuminate a saint's halo, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And the miniatures, those fragile little worlds drawn in the margins of psalters and breviaries. You've painted a whole nativity scene on a piece of vellum no larger than your palm. The ox's breath, the flicker of a torch, a fold in the Virgin's robe so delicate it feels like silk even in pigment. These are not accidents. These are evolutions. They come from failure, from burning through precious lapis because your mixture was too thick, from watching whole panels warp in damp air and vowing never again to trust raw wood. You've learned, you've adapted, you've invented, you've even traded secrets with others, quietly, over a mug of weak ale at the back of a guild meeting. Add egg white to deepen blue. Boil parchment scraps for a stronger binder. Use dried fig milk to make gold leaf stick better in cold air. These aren't written in books. They're passed hand to hand, brush to brush. There's pride in this, real pride. Not the loud kind that boasts from balconies, but the quiet kind that hums in your chest when the glaze sets just right, when the shadows fall into place, when someone looks at your work and just for a second forgets where they are. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need applause or coin or eternal fame. Maybe it's enough that you know what you've done, that your hands have kept the line alive, unbroken, even in a fractured world. But then again, is it? Is craft alone enough to shield you from cold nights, empty stomachs, and patrons who vanish like fog? Can technique win against the sheer weight of the world pressing down on you? So tell me, is mastery a triumph, or just a quieter kind of survival? Maybe technique can carry you through, at least for a while. Maybe the weight of hunger and silence lifts slightly when your fresco dries smooth and true. But there's something else that lightens the burden, even if just for a moment. The presence of others like you. People who speak the language of color, of pressure and pigment, who understand without needing to ask. Your world isn't entirely lonely. You belong to a guild, la confrérie. It's not glamorous, but it's structure. The Compagnons de Saint-Luc, for instance, or the Brotherhood of Saint Eloi, depending on your region. These aren't clubs. They're survival. They regulate prices, settle disputes, guard techniques like relics, and they give you access to commissions, or take them away if you cross the wrong master. You remember the first time you entered the guild hall. The walls were hung with panels too good to name. A smell of smoke and dried oil floated through the air. Men and women leaned over benches, arguing over brush quality, pigment sources, the best ratio of lime to sand. It felt like stepping into a temple. No saints, just stubborn craftsmen pretending not to believe in miracles. Some of them became friends, others rivals. All of them were necessary. There's Bertrand, who sculpts wooden altars but loves to gossip more than he sands. Or Johanna, who paints delicate borders in manuscripts and leaves tiny birds hidden in the vines, secrets for the sharp-eyed, or old Gilles, whose hands shake now, but whose advice still carries the weight of 20 winters' worth of failures. You trade tips like currency. Boil madder root longer to deepen red. Avoid sheep parchment in summer. It curls. And sometimes you share more. A laugh over spilled ink. A stolen hour of warmth by a brazier. A bottle passed back and forth, half out of celebration, half to forget the client who never paid. But it's not always kind. Competition simmers under every compliment. There are whispers about stolen commissions, apprentices poached, sketches borrowed and claimed as original. Once, someone smeared your nearly dry panel with lye while you slept. You never found out who. Still, the community holds, because it must. The apprentices bring energy. Some are earnest, all elbows and eagerness. Others are trouble. You were like them once, called Rat, more often than by name. You cleaned brushes, crushed pigments, carried wet panels through rain without complaint. It was humiliation, yes, but also education. You learned how to endure, how to see, how to not give up. And now they watch you work, some with respect, some with envy. One will one day surpass you, as you once surpassed your own master. That's the rhythm of it, like paint layering over paint, each generation building on the last, even if it covers what came before. But with every shared meal, every muttered prayer for dry weather, every side glance at a better technique, there comes the question: how do you stay true to your vision, your quiet, aching need to make something real, when every glance from your peers feels like a test? So tell me, how do you survive in a world full of artists, without losing the one that lives in you? Of course, you've shared wine with fellow painters, traded pigment secrets by firelight, and found flickers of comfort in the knowing eyes of a guild brother or sister. But the world beyond your circle, the world that walks past your work without a second glance, rarely sees what you do as anything greater than decoration, ornament, a flourish on the surface of stone. You're not a thinker, they say. You're not a philosopher or a priest. You don't write laws. You don't own land. You're not nobility. You're not even technically a real artisan in the eyes of some. You're just a painter, someone who smears walls with saints and gold leaf, who makes books heavier with color. They admire your work, perhaps. But you're invisible. You've been hired to paint chapels where you weren't allowed to pray. You've gilded ceilings you weren't invited to dine beneath. You've painted coats of arms for families who wouldn't speak your name aloud, except when it came time to haggle over your fee. You remember once, standing in the back of the nave after finishing a fresco. The patrons gathered below, nodding and whispering as if the image had simply appeared overnight. A woman pointed at your signature in the corner, subtle, scratched into wet plaster, and asked, "Is that the name of the angel?" You didn't correct her. You just smiled and stepped back into shadow. There's irony in it. You shape the way they see the divine. You give faces to their saints, breath to their ancestors, glory to their banners. But in the street, you're jostled like any other tradesman. You carry your brushes in a wrap cloth, and no one knows what's in it, or cares. A mason leaves stones behind. A carpenter, beams and lintels. A blacksmith, horseshoes and hinges. But you leave saints, angels, Madonnas. And yet you're paid less, respected less, remembered less. Some days you want to laugh. Other days you want to scream. Most days you just work. And still, despite it all, you know there's meaning in what you do. Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it goes unnoticed. But you feel it in your bones when the color dries just right, when light touches the gilded edge of a saint's robe, and sets it glowing like dawn itself. You dream sometimes of being recognized, of a world where your name is whispered with reverence, of a time when people point not just at the art, but at the artist, when your life matters as much as the work it leaves behind. But dreams are soft things in a world of coin and command, and you're still here grinding ochre, mending robes, watching the cathedral you helped beautify from the outside. So ask yourself, can art truly shape a destiny, when even its maker is forgotten before the paint has dried? Or is beauty only valuable when it wears someone else's name? You've been dismissed, yes. Underpaid, overlooked, misnamed, unremembered. But at least they let you be there. They let you hold the brush. They might not respect you, but they expect you to exist. Now imagine all that, and then imagine being told you shouldn't even try. Because in this age, you, if you are born a woman, are not expected to paint. You are expected to pray, marry, bear, or bury. Your hands are meant for wool, not wood panels. Your place is the hearth, not the scaffolding. But some refuse that script. Imagine you are one of them. You learn in secret. Maybe your father is a painter, and you mix his pigments while he mutters over contracts. Maybe your older brother needs a hand, and you sketch saints behind closed shutters. Maybe you're a nun, and the abbess looks the other way while you slip into the scriptorium and add just a touch of color to the margins. The hurdles are everywhere. You're not allowed in most guilds. You can't sign commissions. If you create something remarkable, it's often attributed to the man closest to you, your mentor, your brother, your husband. Or it's simply unsigned, absorbed into anonymity. Still, you work. You paint behind cloister walls, miniatures, initials, floral borders alive with precision. You mix your own ink from berries or your own red from beetle shells, and you learn how to make it stay on parchment, how to coax light from page edges. In the rarest cases, you paint walls, large frescoes, altarpieces, but only if your family name is heavy enough, or if you're disguised behind a man's brush, or if a noble patron takes a liking to your delicate hand, as if your gift were lacework, not labor. You cannot stand before a panel in a marketplace. You cannot debate clients over price. You cannot hire apprentices. And if you do succeed, if by some miracle your name travels outside the convent walls, there will always be those who say, she must have copied it. Her father helped. A man must have done the face. But still, you rise early. You crush the shell. You scrape the vellum. You paint the Virgin's tears with a trembling hand, knowing they mirror your own frustrations. There were women. Marietta Robusti, daughter of Tintoretto. Hildegard of Bingen, cloistered but luminous. Ende of Spain, whose name survives only in a single glorious signature. Ende Pintrix et Dei Autrix. Ende, painter and servant of God. Their hands shaped history, though the record tried to forget them. Their colors live on, quietly, persistently. And sometimes, a girl sees your work on the margin of a book, a bird, or a saint, or a face that looks just like her. And for a moment, she believes she could create too. So ask yourself, what is it like to fight for the right to create in a world that barely lets you be seen? What does it mean to seek light when the sun itself turns its face away from you? So many rules, so many lines drawn long before your brush ever touches the wall. You step into a chapel and the subject is already chosen. You're not asked what speaks to you. You're told the Annunciation, full figure, facing east, or the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. Add arrows, lots of arrows. You nod, you sketch, you paint, but inside, sometimes you scream. because every commission is soaked in instruction. The saint must be clothed this way. The virgin must tilt her head that way. The Christ child must not look too childlike. Faces are formulaic. Hands follow a pattern. Even halos must adhere to regulation size. And you know the code. You know why the background must be gold leaf. Why Peter always holds a key, Paul a sword. Why dragons mean sin and lilies mean purity. And the color blue, real blue, lapis lazuli blue, means power. Divine, royal, unattainable. You respect it. You do. These are sacred images for sacred spaces. They're not supposed to be personal. You're a vessel, not a voice. That's what you've been taught. But still, when you're alone with a panel, late at night, the workshop empty, and the wax taper flickering low, your hand slips. A flower not in the script, a bird tucked in the corner, a saint's face that looks, just slightly, like your mother. Or like the boy you once sketched by the river before he joined the monks and disappeared behind stone walls. And sometimes it goes further. You illuminate a manuscript with vines that twist too wildly. You sketch a figure in the margin that has no name, no story, no place. Just a face, watching. Just a moment of you trying to leave something behind, something true. You know the risks. A patron might see it and frown, might call it irreverent or unorthodox, might scrape the whole image off and deduct the cost from your pay. Or worse, replace you with someone more obedient, more neutral. But still you wonder, what would you paint if no one told you what to do? If there were no saints, no sins, no scripts, if the wall belonged to you? Would it be a field, a memory, a dream? So tell me, what happens when the artist begins to long for his own subject? You always thought the brush was yours, that if nothing else, your hand was free, that even within the confines of gold halos and canonical robes, there was still a space where your mind could move, where your truth could live, quietly, discreetly. But then the world changes. A new bishop is appointed, the old patron dies, a city council is overturned, and suddenly your work is no longer art. It's a message, a statement, a threat, or worse, a liability. You remember when the monastery in Chartres changed abbots. Overnight, the frescoes were whitewashed, not because they were poorly done, not because they offended doctrine, but because they'd been commissioned by the previous abbot. His name was now poison, and your work, once praised, was deemed tainted by association. Or the time the Duke of Burgundy demanded that the Virgin be repainted to look sterner, less soft. Too much compassion invites weakness, he said. Let her eyes judge, not console. You altered the tilt of the mouth. You sharpened the brow. You obeyed, because you had to. And sometimes you don't obey. You hide symbols. A lamb with 7 eyes. A crown lying in mud. A saint's feet turned subtly toward the common people instead of heaven. Harmless, they'd say. Decorative. But you know better. Because art speaks, even when it whispers. During reforms, this becomes dangerous. The paintings of indulgent nobles are quietly destroyed. The miniatures of miracle births vanish from abbey shelves. Images of Christ shift in tone, from suffering to sovereign, from brother to emperor, and you must adapt, quickly. Your guild warns you. One wrong commission could get you banned, or tried, or worse, forgotten. And yet, people come to you with new demands. Depict the Holy Spirit as light, not flame. Remove the angels. They distract from Scripture. The king prefers less red. It reminds him of blood. You nod. You smile. You paint. But in the solitude of your workshop, your hands hesitate. What if your work becomes nothing more than echo? What if every brushstroke is someone else's voice? What if all that's left of you is compromise? Or perhaps you lean in. You turn your art into quiet resistance. You depict saints with the faces of beggars. You place the poor at the feet of kings. You paint peace into scenes of conquest. And though few notice, some do, because every pigment is placed with care. Every line can be a prayer or a protest. And that's the danger, isn't it? You're not just painting saints. You're shaping belief. You're not just decorating walls. You're writing history, one that may not align with power. So now tell me, what do you do when the act of painting is no longer survival, but rebellion? You're kneeling again, not in prayer, though the motion is the same, not in submission, though the aches in your back and knees might say otherwise. You kneel because it's the only way to bring the light just so, across the panel. The only angle from which the figure's cheekbone catches the gold you laid beneath the pigment. The only position from which the Virgin seems not to float but to breathe. This is where your true power lies, not in fame, nor coin, nor recognition, but in technique, in secrets passed from hand to hand, master to apprentice, whispered over charcoal sketches and drying boards. You know how to make shadows from green, not black, green. You learned that early. It softens the skin, lends life to saints who otherwise look embalmed. And you know that if you mix a touch of egg yolk into the pigment, it grips the plaster differently, less powder, more permanence. You've studied light, not in a scholar's way, but with your eyes and your gut. You know which hour of morning light will stretch gold leaf into heaven, and which angle makes a martyr's eyes shine with sorrow, not resignation. You know how to make a halo flicker like it's alive, how to pull depth from a flat wall using only a curve of brown and a stroke of white. And perspective. Ah, that's a battlefield. Some masters cling to the old ways, stacked figures, inverted depth, symbolic scale. But you've toyed with the new ideas, vanishing points, horizon lines. You saw it once in a traveling Florentine's work, and it moved you. So you tried it, quietly. A background chapel receding properly behind the saints. A cobblestone floor that led the eye inward. It wasn't noticed, at least not aloud. But the monk who saw it first stared longer than most, said nothing, just lingered. Some of your tools you guard like relics. The brush made of squirrel tail, bound in copper. The stone you used to grind lapis. The sharp bone you used to score perfect circles into plaster. No one touches them but you. Not out of superstition, out of craft. Because you've learned what matters. You've made mistakes, overworked faces, cracked gesso, flaking layers from too much binder. You've watched entire panels warp because you didn't wait for the board to settle. But you learned, and that learning, it became pride. There's a rhythm to your work now, a harmony. You see a commission and already know which colors will sing, which elements will strain. You've stopped fearing the blank wall. You crave it. It's where you prove you still matter. When the rest of the world ignores you, when the pay is low and the patrons cruel and the apprentices clumsy, this is your sanctuary. Not the church, not the marketplace, but the space between pigment and plaster. The breath held just before brush touches surface. You are not rich, you are not revered, but you are good. And some nights, when the candles burn low, and the figure on the wall seems to gaze back with something close to gratitude, you dare to believe that's enough. But then the hunger returns, the cold, the silence. So you wonder, can mastery alone shield you from all the other miseries of your world? Can craft be comfort, when comfort is what you've always painted, but never had? You've heard whispers, quiet ones at first, traders speaking of Florence, travelers mentioning names like Giotto, Masaccio, murmurs of paintings that look, real, of figures that step out of the frame, not hover inside it, of colors that catch the eye not in service of the sacred, but in praise of life. And you feel it, something is shifting. Not in your town yet, not in your chapel, but in the air, like the scent of spring before the snow melts. The way patrons speak is different now. One asked for a more natural Madonna. Another wanted a portrait of himself, not as a donor at the feet of a saint, but simply as himself, without halo, without symbolism. It makes you pause. You, who were taught that all art must point upward, that beauty must be in service of doctrine, not delight. You, who bent over frescoes in silence, matching every fold of a robe to sacred geometry. Now you're told that eyes can meet the viewer, that flesh may be flesh, not emblem, that landscapes can stretch to distant hills, skies turning pale as they recede. What do you do with this? You begin to experiment, just slightly. A hand curved more gently, a face lit from a single earthly window, shadows that fall where they should, not where tradition says they must. Your mentor frowns, your apprentice grins. You stay quiet, but inside you wonder, because with the coming of this new era, this renascita, this rebirth, comes both terror and promise. You fear losing your craft. You fear being called outdated, replaced, forgotten. But you also feel curious. Curious about the freedom to choose your subject. Curious about oil paint, not just tempera. Curious about the idea that your name might be remembered, not just the saints you painted. You hear of contracts signed with the artist's name. Your name, not hidden beneath the veil of anonymity. You hear of studies in anatomy, of notebooks filled with flying machines and dissected limbs. Art no longer locked in the chapel, but on the walls of villas and palaces. But here's the irony. The skills you've honed in dim workshops, layering pigment, balancing light, coaxing life from mineral and egg and brush, are the very foundations this Renaissance stands upon. You are not obsolete. You are the bridge. Your hands remember the rules. But your eyes, they begin to dream of more. And yet you ask yourself, is it hope or heresy to dream of painting what you see? To set aside saints for stories, halos for horizon lines? Can you, born in shadow, reach for light? So answer this. Could a medieval hand ever truly believe in the age of rebirth? So, centuries have passed. The stone walls you once brushed with your careful strokes have crumbled, rebuilt, and crumbled again. Roofs caved in. Rain bled through plaster. Smoke blackened altars. Time did not ask for your permission, but not everything was lost. Imagine walking now. Yes, you, still in that worn smock, calloused fingers forever stiff with dried pigment, through a cathedral not far from where you once lived. You would hardly recognize it. Electric lights hum where candles once flickered. Tourists click small machines at the walls. Latin is silent. Silence itself is a memory. And yet, your hand is still here. There. Look closer. That faded blue curve on the apse. That was your midnight lapis, crushed by hand, too precious to waste. That pale line where Mary's cheek meets the air. That was your struggle with shadows, your gamble with wet lime, your prayer disguised as gesture. They don't know your name, not really. Maybe a scrap in a record book, maybe anonymous master of the West Nave, maybe just artist unknown. But your work survived, not all of it. Some pieces lie hidden under layers of history. Others were painted over by new trends, by bolder hands, by the Renaissance's golden boys with their gilded frames and wine-drenched commissions. But in the cracks, you're still breathing. Conservators touch your brushstrokes through microscopes. They whisper about your technique. They scrape away centuries of soot like they're peeling back the layers of your silence. You, who once painted for bread, for approval, for salvation, you are now studied, revered, protected under glass and velvet rope. And those small illuminated letters you inked by candlelight, tiny saints tucked between Latin verses. Some survived plagues, floods, even reformations. People now stare at them in hushed awe behind museum glass, as if holiness still lingers in the gold. Your legacy is not fame. Your legacy is presence. Not loud, not boastful, but persistent, stubborn, gentle as pigment ground into time. No one needs to know who you were to see what you did. You lived in a world that often did not see you, but centuries later, strangers pause in front of your labor and feel something. And here's the strange, beautiful part. Even now, as students copy your techniques to understand the soul of your era, as historians write essays about your context, as digital archives immortalize your invisible signature, still, you remain a mystery. And maybe that is the gift. Maybe to be remembered not by name but by effect is the purest form of remembrance. You are not a headline in a textbook. You are a breath inside stone, a glint inside paint, a voice with no face, whispering through color. But then, as you kneel there, forever imagined in shadowed halls, one question hums behind your ribs like the distant echo of a church bell. If you knew how little the world would remember your name, would you still have painted? And how would you want to be remembered if anyone ever asked? And so it ends. The light in your chamber is almost gone, flickering like a dying thought. Your brushes lie rinsed beside the cold water basin, their bristles gently curled from wear. The pigments are closed. The egg tempera has dried on the edges of its bowl, and the linen cloth you used to wipe your fingers smells faintly of linseed and soot. You sit back. Your spine aches in the same curve it always does. Your hands are stained. Crimson under your nails, indigo along your wrist, gold dust invisible but still there. You touch your face unconsciously, forgetting the smudge on your thumb. A trace of vermilion stays with you. Perhaps it always will. The walls around you are bare stone, but the air carries what you've made. Behind your eyelids, you can still see today's strokes. A saint's eyes turned upward, a halo with perfect symmetry, the fragile shading that made a face look like it breathed. You remember the quiet in the cathedral as you worked, the way each echo waited respectfully before returning. It wasn't easy. It never was. There were days you wanted to give it up, when your hands trembled from cold or doubt, when a crack in the wall ruined days of effort, when a noble scoffed, when you ate only bread, and even that felt too hard. But then there were the moments no one else saw, when your lines curved just right, when the pigment bloomed like fire in wet plaster, when a child stared in awe at a painted angel, when silence filled the church, not from absence, but from reverence. And now, you lie back on the thin straw mattress. The moon casts a silver frame around the wooden beams above. The city has quieted. No boots in the alley, no bells, no sermons. Just breath and the memory of color. You've survived. And more than that, you've made something. Something that might last longer than this roof. Something that might be touched by fingers 5 centuries from now. You'll never know them. They'll never know you. But they might pause before one of your saints, or touch a manuscript page you once illuminated, and feel something. And isn't that enough? You close your eyes. The ache in your back softens. Your hands fall to your sides. For once, no one's calling your name. There are no deadlines, no commissions. Just you, the dark, and the pulse of a life that mattered in quiet ways. So now, imagine. Imagine if you had lived then. Not as a noble, not as a knight, but as this quiet craftsman. Could you have endured it? Would you have painted anyway? Would you have left behind beauty in a world that didn't always see it? And now, as your breathing slows, as the edges of this memory blur into the warmth of sleep, just rest. You've worked hard, truly. The world can wait. The stone is silent. The color has dried. And you are remembered. Good night.